The spotlight was a physical warmth on my skin, a gentle pressure that seemed to still the very air in the grand ballroom. From the edge of the stage, I could see a sea of blurred faces, a low murmur of anticipation rippling through the crowd. My heart was not pounding with fear, but beating a slow, steady, powerful rhythm of absolute certainty. My eyes scanned the front tables, the VIP section, and there he was. My husband, Mark. He was leaning back in his chair, a smug, proprietary smile on his face as he gestured toward the empty podium, no doubt telling his colleagues, "Just wait, we've landed the one and only Elena Vance for tonight." I told the board it was a coup. He was so proud of his connection to her, to the mysterious, brilliant consultant who was revolutionizing their industry. He just didn't know that Elena Vance was me. The memory that flashed behind my eyes in that suspended moment was not of a boardroom or a contract. It was the sound of our refrigerator door closing, a soft, definitive thud from last Tuesday night. I had been reaching for the milk for my tea. "Still on that, are you, Clara?" Mark's voice had come from the kitchen doorway, not loud, but it always carried a specific weight, a density of disappointment that could pin me in place. He didn't call me fat anymore, not directly. He had graduated to a more sophisticated lexicon of disdain. "I just think, at your age, with your metabolism, perhaps almond milk would be a better choice. Or just skip it altogether. You'll thank yourself in the morning." I had paused, my hand hovering in the cool air of the fridge. I remember the feel of the cold glass bottle, the condensation beating on its surface. I remember the exact shade of the overhead light reflecting on the polished marble countertops he'd insisted on, a cold, sterile white. I didn't turn around. I simply closed the door, leaving the milk inside, and filled my mug with hot water. The taste of that plain, bitter tea seemed to encapsulate my entire existence in that moment, a life diluted, stripped of its simple comforts to fit into the narrow, airbrushed frame of the life he wanted. That was my normal. That had been my normal for the last 5 of our 7 years of marriage. It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, his comments felt like care. When we first met, I was a vibrant, busy woman, a size 14 who loved to cook and eat and laugh. He was a sleek, ambitious junior executive, and his attention felt like a miracle. He'd say, "I love a woman with curves, Clara. You look real." And I'd felt seen, adored. The first time he suggested I join his new gym with him, I was flattered. The first time he gently pushed away the second helping of pasta I'd served myself, saying, "Think of your goals, sweetheart," I felt a twinge of something sharp, but I brushed it away. He was just helping me be my best self, wasn't he? He was rising so fast in his company, and he wanted a wife who reflected that success. It felt like a shared project. Our home, a beautiful, minimalist townhouse, became a showpiece. And I became its chief curator. My days were filled with managing the cleaning service, ordering the artisanal groceries, ensuring every surface gleamed with impersonal perfection. The woman who had once managed a bustling team of graphic designers was now an expert in crumb-free countertops. I had let my career fade, not with a dramatic resignation, but with a slow, quiet dimming. He'd encouraged it. "Your little freelance projects are so stressful, Clara. Let me take care of us. Focus on making our home a sanctuary." Our sanctuary. It was filled with large, stark photographs of landscapes, no people. The furniture was angular and modern, beautiful to look at but uncomfortable to sink into. It was a home designed for observation, not for living. And I, Clara, was its most observed object. The body shaming evolved from suggestions to a constant, low-grade critique. He'd kiss my forehead and say, "You're so soft," but his tone would make the word feel like a flaw. He stopped taking me to his company events after the first Christmas party. I'd worn a red dress I felt beautiful in. On the drive home, he was silent for 10 full minutes before saying, "Perhaps something more structured next time. That color draws the eye a certain way." He never explicitly said I was an embarrassment. He just made me feel like one, with a sigh, a glance, a carefully worded piece of loving advice. The loneliness was the worst part. It was a hollow space inside me that even his presence couldn't fill. He was there, in the same room, scrolling through his phone, commenting on the news, but he was not with me. I was a piece of the scenery, one he occasionally found unsatisfactory. The turning point, the first tiny crack in this beautiful, terrible snow globe I lived in, came on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon. He had left his laptop open on the dining table while he took a call outside. An email notification popped up. The subject line read, "Urgent, proposal feedback from E. Vance." Elena Vance. I knew the name. For weeks, Mark had been obsessed with this elusive industry strategist. Her insights were legendary, her consultation fees astronomical, and her identity a complete secret. She only worked remotely, through intermediaries. "If we can get her," Mark had told me, breathless with ambition, "my promotion to vice president is guaranteed." She's a ghost, but she's a genius. And as I stared at that name on his screen, a ghost of my own, the woman I used to be, stirred for the first time in years. The woman who understood that industry because I had helped build parts of it. The woman with ideas. A wild, impossible thought, fragile as a soap bubble, formed in my mind. I picked up my own tablet, the one I used for browsing recipes and looking at Pinterest boards for home decor. My fingers, which had grown accustomed to tapping out shopping lists, opened a new private browser window. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, hopeful bird trapped in a cage I had almost accepted as my home. I began to type. The first step was to create an identity. Elena Vance. The name came to me with a strange certainty. Elena sounded strong, elegant, and international. Vance had a sharp, authoritative ring to it. It was a name that commanded respect, a name that belonged in boardrooms, not hidden away in a suburban townhouse. I set up a new, encrypted email account and a bare-bones professional website, listing my services as a strategic consultant for corporate branding and market repositioning. It was a shell, an empty husk, but it was a start. For the first week, I did nothing but read. I devoured industry journals, financial reports, and analysis on my old tablet, the blue light glowing late into the night while Mark slept soundly beside me. The world I had left behind had changed, but the fundamental principles were the same. The language of business, of consumer psychology, of brand narrative, it all came flooding back to me, not as a distant memory, but as a native tongue I had simply forgotten I could speak. My first move was a calculated risk. I found a small, struggling firm that operated in a niche adjacent to Mark's massive corporation. Using the language of my old career, I drafted a detailed, unsolicited proposal for them. I outlined their core weaknesses and presented a clear, three-phase strategy for reinvention. I sent it from the Elena Vance email with a simple note: "I see potential in your brand that the market is missing. This is my initial assessment. No fee required. If you find value, we can discuss terms." I held my breath for 3 days. When the reply came, it was a single line: "Who are you?" My fingers trembled as I typed back, the lie feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. "I am a consultant. My work is my identity. Do you find the analysis accurate?" The response was quicker this time. "It's terrifyingly accurate. We'd be fools not to listen. What's the next step?" That was the moment the ghost began to take solid form. That small, virtual yes was a crack of light in the darkness of my life. I started working with them, my hours meticulously planned for when Mark was at the office or traveling. I used a voice modulator on our video calls, presenting myself as a woman who valued her privacy above all else. My clients, so grateful for the lifeline, never questioned it. They called me Ms. Vance with a tone of reverence that was a world away from the way Mark said Clara, with its lingering notes of disappointment. The money began to trickle in. I opened a separate bank account, a secret buried deep in the digital world. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the proof. Every dollar in that account was a tiny, tangible piece of my worth, evidence that I was not the person Mark saw when he looked at me. The irony was thick enough to taste, bitter and sweet at the same time. Mark would come home, frustrated, slamming his briefcase down. "We're never going to land Elena Vance," he'd groan, pouring himself a scotch. "Her agent says she's reviewing our proposal, but it's been weeks. She's a goddamn phantom." I would be sitting right there, on our expensive, uncomfortable sofa, folding his laundry. "I'm sure you'll impress her," I'd say, my voice soft and neutral. "Your company is a leader in the field." "You don't understand, Clara," he'd sigh, the familiar condescension coating his words. "It's not about being a leader. It's about perception. Vance has the power to shift the entire industry's perception. Without her, we're just another big company. With her, we're visionaries." He had no idea he was talking to her. He was describing my power to me, all while believing I was incapable of understanding it. The deception created a strange new distance between us, a chasm I had dug myself. I was living a double life, and the more successful Elena became, the more Clara seemed to fade. I started noticing the small cruelties more acutely. The way his eyes would skim over my body when I got dressed, his gaze lingering on my hips before he quickly looked away. The way he'd suggest a salad for dinner, even on a cold night when I'd spent hours preparing a hearty stew. "Trying to watch my figure," he'd say, patting his own flat stomach, a not-so-subtle hint for me to do the same. One evening, he was preparing for a high-stakes virtual meeting with Elena Vance's representation. He was nervous, pacing the living room, practicing his pitch. "You know, it's all about presenting an image of flawless success," he mused, more to himself than to me. "From the architecture of our headquarters to the personal lives of our executives. Everything must communicate control, excellence, and discipline." He stopped and looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time that day. "Maybe you should come to the annual gala this year, Clara." My heart leapt for a single, wild second. Was this an olive branch? A crack in his disdain? He continued, his tone practical, cold. "It would look strange if the wife of a potential vice president was never seen. We'll find you a good dress. Something forgiving." And just like that, the brief flicker of hope was extinguished. Forgiving. The word hung in the air between us, a verdict. He wasn't inviting me, he was accessorizing me. I was to be another piece of the flawless image, a potential flaw that needed to be expertly camouflaged. That night, lying beside his sleeping form, I made a decision. I opened my secret email on my phone. There was a new message from the organizing committee for his company's annual gala. They had heard of Elena Vance's legendary work and were humbly requesting her presence as the keynote speaker. They mentioned it was the event of the year, attended by all the top executives, including my husband, Mark. I typed my reply, my thumb moving with a steady, silent certainty in the dark. "Dear committee," I wrote. "Thank you for the invitation. I would be delighted to accept." The weeks leading up to the gala were a study in surreal duality. In my Clara life, I played my part perfectly. I listened to Mark's anxious updates about the gala, his pride that his company had secured the incomparable Elena Vance. I even accompanied him to a boutique, where I patiently tried on a series of elegant, dark, slimming dresses under his critical eye. We settled on a long, navy blue gown with a high neckline. "It's very dignified," he said, which I knew was his code for "it hides the problem areas." "It's beautiful," I lied, feeling the heavy, restrictive fabric against my skin. It was a costume for the character he wanted me to play. In my Elena life, I was preparing for my grand entrance. I hired a discreet stylist, a fierce and wonderful woman named Simone, who asked, "What is the story you want to tell with your look?" I told her I wanted to feel powerful, radiant, and utterly myself. She found me a stunning, crimson wrap dress that flowed and moved with me, celebrating my curves instead of punishing them. "This is your power color, darling," she said, and for the first time in years, I looked in a mirror and didn't see a body to be critiqued. I saw a woman to be reckoned with. The day of the gala arrived. Mark was a bundle of nervous energy, his focus entirely on the impression he would make on the mysterious Miss Vance. He barely looked at me as we got ready in separate rooms. I had told him I would meet him at the venue, citing a last-minute appointment with a friend who needed help, a flimsy excuse he didn't even question. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs as I stood in the dim backstage area, hidden by a heavy black curtain. I could hear the muffled sounds of the event, the clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation, the occasional burst of polished laughter. I peeked through a gap in the curtain. And I saw him. Mark was holding court at a prime table near the stage, surrounded by his colleagues and superiors. He was smiling, confident, the picture of a man on the cusp of a great triumph. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, every inch the successful executive. I watched him lean over to the CEO, a man named Mr. Sterling, and say something that made the older man laugh and clap Mark on the back. I didn't need to hear the words to know he was boasting about his connection to the keynote speaker, taking credit for the coup of her appearance. The betrayal I felt in that moment was not the sharp, hot pain of infidelity. It was colder, deeper. It was the betrayal of my mind, my talent, my very soul. He was celebrating the fruits of my labor while simultaneously holding the laborer, the woman he saw as Clara, in such profound contempt. He was living in the light of a star he didn't know was burning in his own home. The event coordinator, a flustered young woman with a headset, found me. "Ms. Vance? We're ready for you. They're about to introduce you." I took a deep, steadying breath. The air smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat backstage. This was it. The moment the ghost stepped into the light. From my hiding spot, I watched the company's CEO, Mr. Sterling, take the stage. The room fell into a respectful silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the grand ballroom. "We are incredibly honored tonight to have with us a woman whose strategic insights have reshaped our industry. She is a visionary, a disruptor, and famously, a woman of mystery. It is my great privilege to introduce the one, the only. Elena Vance." A wave of enthusiastic applause filled the room. I saw Mark lean forward, his face alight with anticipation, his hands clapping vigorously. He was looking toward the side entrance, expecting a stranger to emerge. I smoothed the bold red fabric of my dress. I straightened my shoulders. And I walked out onto the stage. The applause continued for a moment, then began to falter, turning into a confused, murmuring ripple. I didn't look at the crowd. My eyes were locked on table 3. I walked to the podium, the spotlight warm on my skin. I adjusted the microphone, the squeak of feedback cutting through the murmurs. Mark's face was a canvas of pure, uncomprehending confusion. He blinked, as if trying to clear a smudge from his vision. His smile had frozen, then slowly began to dissolve. His eyes darted from me, to the CEO, back to me. I saw the exact moment when recognition, cold and horrifying, dawned in his eyes. It wasn't a quick flash, it was a slow, dawning terror, like watching a ship slowly sink on the horizon. His mouth fell slightly open. The color drained from his face, leaving a waxy, pale mask. The confident executive was gone, replaced by a man whose entire reality was being publicly dismantled. The room was now utterly silent, hundreds of people holding their breath, sensing a drama far more compelling than any business speech. I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm, clear, and perfectly audible in the dead silence. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Elena Vance." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. "But some of you in this room know me by another name." I let my gaze sweep slowly, deliberately, across the audience before landing back on him. "My husband, Mark, for instance, knows me as Clara." A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed through the ballroom. All heads swiveled to look at him. He looked like an animal caught in a trap, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and dawning fury. The persona he had so carefully constructed, the successful husband, the connected executive, shattered into a million pieces in front of everyone who mattered to him. The betrayal was complete. And it was his. The silence in the ballroom was a physical entity, thick and heavy. It was broken by the sound of a chair scraping violently against the polished floor. Mark had shot to his feet. His face, once pale with shock, was now mottled with a deep, furious red. The look he gave me was not one of hurt or even betrayal, but of pure, undiluted rage. It was the rage of a man whose property had publicly humiliated him. He didn't say a word. He just turned and shoved his way past the other guests at his table, stumbling in his haste to get away from the hundreds of eyes now fixed on him. He disappeared into the crowd, a storm cloud moving through a stunned sea of people. I watched him go, my heart still beating that strange, steady, powerful rhythm. There was no fear in me anymore. Only a profound, bone-deep calm. I turned my attention back to the microphone. The audience was frozen, a tableau of confusion and rapt attention. Mr. Sterling, the CEO, was still on stage, looking utterly bewildered. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began again, my voice still remarkably even. "I apologize for the dramatic introduction. But sometimes, the most powerful business strategy is authenticity. For the past year, I have been consulting for several firms, including your competitor, Apex Dynamics, under that name. The work I did for them, the strategies I developed, were born from the same mind my husband dismissed over countless dinners, the same intellect he believed was best suited for folding his laundry." A low murmur went through the crowd. I saw glances exchanged, eyebrows raised. This was more than a personal scandal, it was a corporate bombshell. "I understand this is unorthodox," I continued, allowing a small, wry smile to touch my lips. "But my work speaks for itself. The Elena Vance methodology that your company was so eager to acquire is, in fact, simply the result of clear-eyed analysis, strategic creativity, and a refusal to accept the status quo. Qualities, I believe, that are valuable in any environment." I then launched into my prepared keynote speech. But it was different now. Infused with a new, unshakable authority. Every point about corporate transparency, about valuing hidden talent within an organization, about the danger of perception over reality, landed with 10 times its intended weight. I was not just talking about business principles, I was living proof of them. I saw people nodding, not out of politeness, but with genuine, dawning understanding. The woman in the red dress, who had been introduced as a phantom, was now the most real person in the room. When I finished, the applause was not the polite, programmed kind from the beginning of the evening. It was thunderous, sustained, and filled with a kind of awe. As I stepped away from the podium, several people immediately approached the stage, high-level executives, their business cards appearing like white feathers in their hands. "Ms. Vance, Clara, an incredible presentation," one woman said, her eyes shining with admiration. "The courage, the insight, we must talk." I accepted the cards graciously, my mind already whirring with a new kind of potential. The victory was not just in the humiliation, it was in the undeniable validation of my professional worth, on the largest possible stage. I slipped away from the crowd as quickly as I could, my body beginning to tremble now that the adrenaline was fading. I didn't go to the after-party. I didn't look for Mark. I simply collected my coat, walked out into the cool night air, and hailed a taxi. The townhouse was dark and silent when I arrived. I didn't turn on the main lights, just a small lamp in the living room. I sat on that uncomfortable modern sofa, still in my crimson dress, and waited. The silence was different now. It wasn't lonely. It was potent. It was mine. About an hour later, I heard the key in the lock. The door opened and closed with a controlled quietness that was more frightening than a slam. Mark stood in the doorway, still in his tuxedo, but he looked wrecked. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were dark hollows of fury and shame. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stared at me from across the room, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Who are you?" he finally whispered, the question ripped from somewhere deep and wounded. "I'm the woman you married," I said, my voice calm. "You just never bothered to see her." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You made a fool of me. In front of Sterling, in front of the entire board. My God, Clara, my career." "Your career?" I repeated, a faint, sad smile touching my lips. "Mark, for months you've been begging for my expertise. You've been praising my mind. Your career was saved tonight because of me. The only thing that was destroyed was your illusion that you were superior to me." He took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "This was a deliberate, malicious act. You planned this ambush for months." "I built a life for myself," I corrected him, my tone hardening. "Because the one you were giving me was a slow death by 1,000 cuts. Something more structured. A forgiving dress. Your little freelance projects. I didn't ambush you, Mark. I just stopped hiding from you." He was silent again, the truth of my words hitting him with a force my revelation on stage could never have matched. The cruelty had been so casual, so ingrained, he hadn't even recognized it as a weapon. Now, he was seeing the scars. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice hollow. "That," I said, standing up, the red dress swirling around me, "is something I no longer have to discuss with you. I'm going to a hotel tonight. We can talk about the practicalities of our separation tomorrow." I walked past him, toward the bedroom to pack a bag. He didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, in the middle of our beautiful, cold sanctuary, finally understanding that the most valuable asset he had ever had in his life had just walked out the door, and he had been the one to drive her away. The hotel room was a sanctuary of anonymous quiet. There were no sharp-edged furniture, no cold, reflective surfaces. Just a soft bed, a neutral painting, and a profound, echoing silence that belonged only to me. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind I hadn't experienced in years. There was no dread for the morning, no anticipation of a critical comment. When I woke, the sun was streaming through the window, and my first feeling was not anxiety, but a simple, clear-headed certainty. My phone, which I had silenced, was lit up with notifications. Dozens of emails. Connection requests on professional networking sites. Several missed calls from unknown numbers, and a single, solitary missed call from Mark. I didn't listen to the voicemail. The world of Elena Vance was now clamoring for attention, and I had the power to choose how to respond. I spent the morning at the small desk in my room, my laptop open. I drafted a clear, professional email to Mr. Sterling, the CEO. I apologized again for the personal nature of the revelation but stood firmly by the value of my work. I offered to formally begin a consultation contract with the company, under my real name, Clara, should they still be interested. I attached the detailed proposal I had been preparing for them as Elena Vance. I was no longer a phantom, I was a professional, setting her terms. His reply came within the hour. It was succinct and telling. "Clara, no apology necessary. Last night was the most effective corporate culture presentation I have ever witnessed. The board is in agreement. We would be honored to work with you. Let's schedule a meeting for next week. Best, Robert Sterling." A smile touched my lips. The foundation of my new life was cementing itself, not in spite of the drama, but because of the undeniable quality of my work. Then, I opened my personal social media. It was there that I saw the wider, more public ripple effect of the previous night. A colleague of Mark's, someone I barely knew, had posted a vague but telling status: "Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most powerful." Still processing last night. #karma #women in business. It had dozens of likes and supportive comments from people I recognized from the gala. I also saw a message from Sarah, an old friend from my pre-Mark life, whom I'd lost touch with. "Clara. I just heard from a friend of a friend who was at the Sterling Global Gala last night. Was that really you?" The video is everywhere in our industry group chats. Girl, you are a legend. Call me. The video. My heart skipped a beat. I searched for it, and there it was. A shaky, vertically filmed clip, taken from someone's phone in the audience. It captured my walk onto the stage, the dawning confusion, my calm good evening, and the moment I revealed myself as Mark's wife, Clara. The video cut off there, but it had already been shared hundreds of times. The comments were a mix of "Yas Queen, this is the best thing I've ever seen," and "Who is this incredible woman?" Mark's public humiliation was now permanent, digital, and viral. He wasn't just the man whose wife was smarter than him, he was the man who had been too blind to see it, and had been rightfully exposed. The consequences were unfolding in real time, and he had no control over them. I finally listened to his voicemail. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual confident timbre. "Clara. We need to talk. Please. Sterling has put my promotion on indefinite hold. People are laughing at me. My phone has been blowing up. This is a nightmare. Call me back." There was no apology. No recognition of his role in creating this situation. Only the pain of the consequences he was facing. I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a distant sadness for the man I had once loved, whose ego had been his own undoing. I did not call him back. A few days later, I met with my lawyer. I had used the money from my secret account to retain her, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Angela. I explained the entire situation, the emotional abuse, the financial control, my secret career, and the very public unraveling. "Based on what you've told me, and the fact that you've clearly established your own separate income and reputation, you are in a very strong position," Angela said, steepling her fingers. "The public nature of this might actually work in your favor for a swift settlement. He will not want this dragged through court, with the video evidence and all. He'll want it to go away quietly." She was right. When Mark's lawyer contacted her, the tone was surprisingly conciliatory. The man who had always demanded control was now desperate to contain the damage. The narrative of Mark, the cruel, oblivious husband, was a PR disaster he couldn't afford. His career, his social standing, everything he valued was contingent on a perception of success and control, and I had shattered it. We agreed to meet, with our lawyers, at the townhouse the following week to discuss the separation of assets. I arrived alone, after Mark and his lawyer were already inside. Walking through the door felt like entering a museum of a life I no longer lived. Everything was in its place, pristine and cold. Mark looked older. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a defeated slump in his shoulders. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the same table where he had criticized my food and I had secretly built my empire on a tablet. His lawyer did most of the talking. They offered a settlement. It was fair, even generous. He was not fighting for the townhouse, for the furniture, for any of the material things we had accumulated. He just wanted out. As the meeting concluded and the lawyers stepped outside to discuss paperwork, Mark finally spoke to me directly, his voice low. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the tabletop. "Destroying everything we built? Just to prove a point?" I looked at him, this man I had shared a life with, and felt the final piece of my old self let go. "We didn't build this, Mark," I said softly. "You designed it. I just lived in it. And I wasn't proving a point. I was saving my own life." The truth of that statement hung in the air between us, simple and unassailable. The public consequence had been his humiliation. The personal consequence was my liberation. The process of untangling my life from Mark's was surprisingly swift. The public nature of our split and my newfound professional stature seemed to expedite everything. He was eager for me, and the story, to disappear from his life. I took my half of the savings, my own burgeoning income, and I walked away from the cold, minimalist townhouse without a single glance back. I didn't want any of the furniture, the art, the memories. I wanted a clean slate. I found a small, sun-drenched apartment on the other side of the city. The first thing I did was buy a large, incredibly comfortable, overstuffed sofa in a soft, warm cream color. It was the antithesis of everything we had owned. I painted one wall a deep, soothing terracotta. I filled the space with plants and books and the smell of good coffee. It was mine. Every choice, every object, was a love letter to the woman I was becoming. My career as Clara, the strategic consultant, exploded. The notoriety from the gala, coupled with Robert Sterling's public endorsement, opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Companies weren't just hiring me for my ideas, they were hiring me for my story. They wanted the woman who had hidden her light under a bushel for so long, only to have it blaze forth with such spectacular force. I was no longer just an expert, I was a symbol of resilience. I had lunch with Sarah, my old friend. We laughed until we cried as I told her the whole story, from the first passive-aggressive comment about almond milk to the look on Mark's face on that stage. "He never deserved you, Clara," she said, squeezing my hand. "The best revenge is you, living like this. So fully yourself." And I was. I started cooking again, not as a duty, but as a joy. I made rich pasta dishes and baked bread, filling my little apartment with wonderful, comforting smells. I ate what I wanted, when I wanted, and my body, freed from the constant scrutiny, seemed to settle into a comfortable, strong shape that felt truly like my own. About 6 months after the gala, I was walking through a park near my new home, enjoying the crisp autumn air, when I saw him. Mark was sitting on a bench, alone. He looked thinner, and there was a stillness about him I didn't recognize. Our eyes met. For a moment, I considered turning away, but I didn't. I walked over. "Hello, Mark." He looked up at me, and I saw no anger in his face, only a deep, weary sadness. "Clara. You look, well." "I am," I said simply. It was the truth. He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I heard you got the Jacobs account. Congratulations. That's huge." "Thank you." There was a long silence, filled only by the sound of rustling leaves. The past hung between us, not as a sharp pain, but as a settled fact, a chapter that was definitively closed. "I lost the VP promotion," he said quietly, still not looking at me. "Sterling said my judgment was compromised. They gave it to Henderson." I didn't say anything. I felt no schadenfreude, no triumph. Just a distant pity. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he continued, his voice low. "Seeing you up there, it was like a bucket of ice water. I couldn't see what I had become. What I had done to you. I was so obsessed with the image of the perfect life, I forgot to live one. I forgot to let you live one." It was the closest he would ever come to an apology. It wasn't for me, not really. It was for him. A necessary admission for his own healing. "I hope you find some peace, Mark," I said, and I meant it. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a glimmer of the man I had once fallen in love with, buried under years of ambition and false priorities. "You were always enough, Clara. More than enough." I was the one who wasn't. I just nodded. The words had come too late to save us, but perhaps they were just in time to save him from himself. I left him there on the bench, a solitary figure in the fading light. I felt a chapter of my heart finally, gently, close. The anger was gone. The hurt was a scar, not a wound. I had found a forgiveness that wasn't about excusing what he had done, but about freeing myself from the weight of carrying it. My life now was full in a way I had never imagined. I had a career I loved, a home that was a true sanctuary, and a quiet, steady confidence that came from knowing I had pulled myself out of the depths and built something beautiful from the rubble. The woman who had been told she was too much and not enough, all at the same time, had discovered that she was, and always had been, precisely the right amount. The healing wasn't a destination I reached, but a path I walked every day. It was in the simple pleasure of a quiet morning, in the satisfaction of a client's success, in the warmth of a friend's laughter. I had reclaimed my narrative, and in doing so, I had found not just success, but myself. And so, my dear friends, that is my story. The story of how I disappeared into myself for years, believing the cruel whispers that disguised themselves as love. And the story of how I found my way back, not with a shout, but with a quiet, steady resolve that led me onto a stage and into my own power. They say living well is the best revenge. I've learned it's not about revenge at all. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back your voice, your worth, your space in the world. My victory wasn't in my husband's humiliation, it was in my own liberation. It was in the moment I realized that my value was not, and had never been, his to define. I often wonder now, how many other women are out there, right now, being told they are too soft, too loud, too much, or not enough. How many brilliant lights are being dimmed by the small, daily criticisms of someone who claims to love them? Your body is your home. Your mind is your sanctuary. Do not let anyone else hold the keys. So, I leave you with this question, from my heart to yours: have you ever allowed someone else's perception of you to become your prison? And if you have, what is the one, small step you can take today to reclaim your key? If my story has touched you, if it has reminded you of your own strength, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Remember to be kind to yourselves, and to each other. Until next time.